Language isn't just about communication. It's not just about culture or convenience or even connection. It's political, it's strategic, and in many cases, it's a tool of power. Now, this might sound a little bit dramatic, but when you start looking closely at how languages have been shaped, spread, and sometimes imposed, a pattern emerges, and one that tells us a lot about how nations are built and what holds them together. Europe is multilingual by nature, but what if that's also its greatest challenge? As I explore my own curiosity and delve deeper into Europe and the dynamics at play here, I've come across some fascinating insights into the development of language that no one seems to be talking about, the implications of which are pretty far-reaching. So let me ask you, how many languages do you speak? If you're European, the answer is probably 2, or maybe even 3 or 4. But why does this even matter? Wouldn't it just be easier if we all spoke English? Well, maybe, but it's really a lot more complicated than that. Language doesn't just connect us. They help us to think, they shape how we see the world, and crucially, they are a key tool in nation building. As philosopher Philippe Van Parijs put it, while weapons draw borders, languages stabilize them. The near-perfect alignment with the names of European countries and their languages isn't a coincidence, it's a feature. Language doesn't just reflect national identity, it actively creates it. And when you look at the EU today or at the internal politics of countries like Germany, you really start to see how language policy, what's taught, what's promoted, or what's preserved, that this tells a far deeper story about power, unity, and loss. The thing to understand here is that language does not always just organically grow or spread. For it to unite nations, it often has to be implemented consciously. It is very often a top-down decision and promoted or officially implemented by the ruling class to ensure that the masses adopt it. Before unification in 1871, Germany was a collection of independent states with various dialects and languages, and Standard German or Hochdeutsch only became the dominant language when it was promoted as a national language to unify the newly formed country. Education, media, and government policies all enforced its adoption over time, and inevitably throughout this process, certain regional cultures were lost. And in fact, many long-term viewers of this channel have commented that German regional dialects have declined significantly due to this unifying language policy of Hochdeutsch, and it's really predominantly only in the southern states that people still cling on to these linguistic traditions. The same was also the case for China. Historically, China had hundreds of regional languages and dialects like Cantonese, Shanghaiese, Hokkien, Hakka, and it wasn't even until 1956 when the government established Mandarin or Putonghua as the official national language that it really began to solidify and unify the country. And I've been really quite vocal in my opinion that everyone should learn a foreign language. For the cognitive benefits alone, there is little that comes close to it. It's more taxing on the brain than doing complex math calculations and really anything else. But really, that's just, one of many benefits. You have the social benefits, the cultural and historical context, and very often it actually makes you appreciate your own language and heritage much more. If you are trying to learn a language or you've been thinking about starting, then Lingoda could be just the thing for you. Lingoda is an online language school where you are taught by native level teachers, and right now they are running another language sprint. The thing that I like about this the most is that the class sizes are really small. There's maximum 5 students in the class, and the ones that I joined where there were usually only 2 or 3 other students. And for me, at least, this is, the way that I learn best in this kind of environment where other students, they can also help to motivate me and to ask questions that I might not have thought about myself. And the small class size means that you can get personal feedback from the teacher, and there's also no hiding in the back of the classroom. You can turn daily practice into real progress by choosing the sprint or the super sprint when you sign up for Lingoda. If you're really serious about language learning, then I would recommend the Super Sprint Challenge. This is 60 lessons in 60 days where you can get 50% cash back or 60 credits upon your successful completion of the course. Now, Lingoda has a ton of resources. You are actually encouraged to prepare before the lesson, because the lesson itself is there for you to actually practice interacting in the language you are learning. Oh, and just one other thing, the teachers generally only speak in the language you are learning for a full immersive experience. Reach your language learning goals today with the Lingoda Sprint Challenge. You can sign up with my link in the description below to save 20% on your sign-up fee, and not only that, you can get an additional 20 euros off with my code BRITSPRINT. This offer only lasts for a limited time, so don't put off your dreams. Click the link in the description below and start your language learning journey today. The thing I want to discuss here is that Europe has seen a dramatic change over the last 3 decades linguistically. Now, this is based on data from the 2024 Eurobarometer survey, which is produced by the European Commission. There's a really cool website called languageknowledge.eu, which mobilizes the Eurobarometer's linguistic data. And so you can get a very clear idea of how the linguistic landscape has changed over the past 3 decades in all the EU member states. The thing about data is that it tells a different story depending on which lens you view it through. And so the Eurobarometer survey themselves presented it as a unifying picture of Europe, which I would really love to be true, but I'm not sure how accurate that is. What I deduce from the data is that nearly all EU member states are less linguistically unified in 2024 than they were in 2012. But not only that, there's been a dramatic shift, especially in parts of Eastern Europe that were previously under Soviet communist rule, away from Russian and towards English. So, is this the start of national disintegration, or maybe the beginning of a unifying linguistic revolution that Europe so desperately needs? Well, maybe it's a bit of both. Of the EU's 27 member states, 24 use a closely related word for their national language and their country. Austria, Belgium, and Cyprus are really only the only exceptions. And as I mentioned before, this is no coincidence. The unity and even the territorial integrity of a nation is closely linked to the sharing of a single language by all its citizens. And it is the reason why governments impose language policies if they do not organically spread by themselves. The 6 countries managed to get nearly 98% of the population to know their language well or very well. And it may surprise you to hear that Germany was one of them. Even though less than 90% of the population are native German speakers, the country still managed to get 98% of the population to speak German well or very well. So, well done, Germany. Latvia and Estonia are among the least linguistically unified at 88 and 82%, mainly because about a quarter of the population are native Russian speaking. Luxembourg was also below 90% unified, and by far the lowest performer was Belgium at just 66%, which is slightly ironic given the fact that this is where the headquarters of the European government is situated. But the real revelation in this data is the spread of English. Now, I've talked about this at length in many videos, and I see it as a large detractor for native English speakers to even try to learn foreign languages. Because whether you like it or not, English is the lingua franca of Europe, and it is only increasing. This is where the breakdown into 3 age groups is highly illuminating. And so in the 2012 data for the EU, the top trio of English, German, and French is the same in the oldest and the youngest age groups, but the percentage gap between English and the other 2 languages grew dramatically from the oldest to the youngest. And so this means that today, young people are overwhelmingly choosing to learn English above all other languages. Most Europeans in the youngest age group now claim to master it as a non-native language. And so clearly Brexit did not halt the march towards a common lingua franca. So what does this mean? Well, that really depends on how you look at it. For communication and social cohesion, it is necessary to have a common language, but inevitably things get lost in the process. And I'm sure you've all noticed how English is infiltrating many other European languages, and the lines are becoming very blurred with weird amalgamations cropping up like Denglish or Franglish. And the interesting thing here is that, at least in Western Europe, it is spreading culturally and organically. It is not a top-down process, like that of Hochdeutsch or Mandarin Chinese. In Eastern Europe, there has been some top-down promotion of English, which we'll get into in just a minute. But the increasing dominance of English is not always welcomed. France is probably the most high-profile example of putting limits on the spread of English in an attempt to preserve the purity of the French language. Certain laws mandate that French be used in official government publications, advertisements, and in the workplace. And it also requires French to be the language used in media, including TV programs and films. France also has cultural policies and has instituted quotas for French language music and television content to combat the dominance of English language media. And not only that, they have even gone one step further to attempt to create French equivalents of English terms, especially in technology and business, in an attempt to keep the language pure. And this is not something which Germany has implemented. Like, if you have a conversation about online digital stuff, it often feels like you're speaking English, but with German grammar. I think this has had mixed results. Young people in France, as in all other European countries, are choosing to learn English of their own accord. But probably the most significant development is the process by which English has replaced Russian in former Soviet republics and other Eastern European countries. I'll just put this graph on the screen so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But Russian learning varied widely between these 9 countries. But also you can see how it has fallen spectacularly in all of them, from the oldest to the youngest generation, and in 3 countries all the way down to 0. Now, this went hand in hand with a sharp rise in the knowledge of English, with a percentage over 10 times higher for the youngest than for the oldest generation in most of these countries. And so, in my opinion, this is a prime example of soft power that is complete and utter cultural takeover in just 12 years. And so I really hate to politicize everything, but language is a potent form of cultural technology that, when wielded correctly, can be far more powerful than physical weapons. It means that all these young people in Eastern European countries are getting their information in English rather than Russian, which means they inevitably will see the world through a Western lens and empathize with Western values. Or am I reading too much into this? Overall, the southern countries such as Spain and Italy score lower in English proficiency than their northern neighbors, but the data is hard to ignore. There is a generational shift towards embracing English, which, if it continues, means that most Europeans will grow up bilingual in English and their country of birth's own language. History has shown that a common language is necessary for a country to function effectively, but it's not just that, it's not just about efficiency and functionality. Language goes deep into identity. And there is no question about it, with the prevalence of a unifying language, parts of culture will be lost. The question is, can individual nations find common ground while preserving their own unique and distinct cultures?